Looking at the rand, it wasn't more than a week ago when it was trading in a fairly stable and narrow band of sort of 8 Rand 20, 8.22. Just a moment ago when Alicia was there at the wall, it was 8 Rand 80. This is a big departure from the recent trends.
Morning, David. Yes, absolutely. The rand really has been hammered in the past couple of days, and I think a lot of that has to do with domestic developments. Investors had been holding off somewhat even as the domestic strike situation seemed to be getting worse. A lot of that to do with WIGB inflows, but I think now that at least the first portion of that is behind us, that there's a lot more attention, or the rand is starting to reflect to a much greater degree, I think, investor concern over what's happening internally. Of course, we also can't discount the fact that the dollar also rebounded quite strongly on Friday, much better unemployment numbers than coming out of the States. So the rand has really been hammered on a number of fronts.
It's also interesting that in previous weeks we've said the rand has got nothing to do with us, it's to do with international markets, international investors, it's a liquid currency, and you've just said it actually is about us this time.
Well, certainly, I think that the pattern and direction has changed of late, and investors, as I mentioned, starting to pay much more attention, or the rand reflecting to a much greater degree now that the WIGB, I think, noise has somewhat been removed from the market. The rand certainly reflecting to a much greater degree, I think, investor concern over domestic political and strike developments.
And we've had analysts saying that the rand, could weaken to as low as 9 to the dollar unless measures are taken to contain the kind of strike action we've seen persist in the mining industry and beyond. Earlier on, we were talking about talks kicking off and, this creation of a collective bargaining council coming to the fore. How are you rating the possible effectiveness of a mechanism like this?
Well, the whole wage agreement that we had in the past, we had 2 or 3 year rolling agreements, just seems to have falling apart. Is a new collective bargaining unit going to be different? I think that the Labour are not in the mood, the Labour units are not in the mood to be told how they should fit in. They want to give the orders, and they've seen it work. Unless massive increases are given, and it can't be afforded, then the industry is in serious trouble. I have doubts about it.
We're joined now by Colin Garrow. Colin, talking about that economic data, but let's pick up firstly on Ian's point about the strike activity. The point made a moment ago with Vuyo is that you and others have said, no, it's not about us, the rand, but this is about the rand. Is this going to be contained? Do we then see the rand strengthen, or on a decline here that's going to take some time?
Well, first of all, don't mock me when I tell you what my valuation of the currency is. One's going to look right through the, I think, the haze that we're seeing, via the strike action. And if you look at a purchasing power parity calculation of the rand, and I use 94 as a base here, not just because of democracy, the year of democracy, but also because it was at the time we first got our first credit rating from, the agencies. But my theoretical calculation of the currency comes in at 7 Rand 67. So in other words, strike action out the way, a little bit of a correction on the euro, some stability in that crisis, and the rand has got some potential to strengthen. I think we've got to look not just in the near term, short term, where the currency could go, because of course it will go, I think probably will go weak. I think Ian's right. We're heading towards 9.25 to the dollar. But more importantly, what is the value of the rand without these issues, and without those issues, my value is 7.67.
Nomvuyo, we've had Colin saying don't mock him when he gives us this kind of figure on the table, a 7.67. Your view on that potential strength coming through, certainly not in the short term, but moving forward?
Well, I do think Colin is a little bit optimistic, but yes, certainly I don't think that the rand is fairly valued where it is. As I mentioned, really a victim of quite a number of cross currents and flows in the currency world. But certainly I think going into next year, our view is certainly that the rand will continue to strengthen. I think we have a year-end average of about 7.50 pegged in for 2013. So certainly once this noise subsides, once we get particularly the elections at the end of the year behind us, and once the strike noise also subsides, I do think there's certainly some potential for recovery in the currency.
Vuyo, what about the mining and manufacturing data? And if we look at that with the rand, then we can start looking at GDP numbers for later.
Yes, absolutely. So I think this week is going to be key in that regard. We have the second set of third quarter numbers for mining and manufacturing. In both instances, the July numbers were quite strong, and in both instances, we therefore expect that the August numbers are likely to be relatively weaker. As far as the manufacturing sector is concerned, we do expect a contraction in production of about 1.1% year on year. But as far as the mining sector is concerned, because quite a significant proportion of that is actually made up of refined minerals, and of course there's going to be a bit of a lag time then between when the strikes started in August and when we start to see that decline in production numbers. So we're expecting, as far as mining is concerned, that there's certainly going to be a much softer number than we saw in July, but probably not an outright contraction. Of course, this is, as you mentioned, going to feed directly into the Q3 GDP figures, and on the whole it's looking like quarter three is going to be quite shaky. And of course, if there's some downside surprise that comes through in both the mining and manufacturing sector, then our year target of 2.5% GDP growth for this year certainly could be in jeopardy.